I'll be honest. Not being a Lokian and committing to doing a deep dive into Loki and why Lokians catch shit about venerating them, it's been stressful. Many a tear has been shed. I'm Loki unsure how well this episode will turn out. My throat has grown Thor from the stress, and it's made me go balder. This is I Am Heathen, and so can you.
You learn enough.
I am heathen.
And so can you.
Warning! The content provided in this episode may be viewed as Lokian to some. If you or anyone you know is offended by this episode, or the bulk of divine mischief, we recommend transforming into a mare in heat to distract the builder's horse. Or, if you're not into the whole giving up the horse cheeks thing, you may want to consider going to your nearest religious institution or windowless room where the ills of the world cannot harm your piteously fragile way of thinking. Just remember, nay means no. Greetings, wanderers of paths less traveled, and welcome back to I Am Heathen and So Can You. I am your host, Tom Hiddleston fetishist and advocate for Svadilfari's butt cheeks, Einar. I have been promising a Loki episode now for quite some time, as I felt Loki stood as an incredible place to begin my deep dive into the gods and understanding practitioners' takes and how each deity I will be covering influences the practitioner at large. And building the script has been interesting, to say the very least. I put out a video on TikTok that was very well received, and I'd like to thank my followers out over there for lending their insights into this episode. With that said, however, before we spread open the cheeks of an unwilling horse, I need to reiterate a few points. While I consider myself a heathen who acknowledges the validity of all divine entities in the Norse pantheon, the basis of my education came from Icelandic Asatru, and despite the fact that I've never stuck with the tradition in the slightest, Loki has simply never resonated with me. I also firmly believe that denigrating a fellow pagan about the worship of a god, now mind you, there is a difference between good-natured trolling and being a dick about it, says a lot more about the person doing the denigrating than the devotee. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing Loki, his presence in the lore, and tackle from multiple angles just why Lokians seem to be so disliked. My friend Dari, the Adirondack animist, go follow him, said so very eloquently. There are a decent amount of facets to this argument, and they're all stupid. Let's make one thing perfectly clear before we begin. I am not a Lokian. I am not a worshipper of Loki. What I am is a heathen who wants to better understand how our reconstructed faith has evolved, how it got cobbled together in what we know as it is now. I think America specifically is in this tremendously unique, weird as all hell position. We can listen to our cousins in faith in Scandinavia, where a living tradition can be fully developed and understood, and give our faith some real staying power, you know? If you've known my voice or seen my face enough, you know I've made my bones on TikTok, and while it's a subspace of the Norse pagan community at large, it happens to be extremely formulaic and, frankly, mind-numbingly repetitive. And that tear-inducing repetition is why we're here today, as among the tens of ad nauseum arguments that have been posed year after year after year, they still seem to keep cropping back up. And among the myriad of Do the gods care about me? Do you need to earn your Mjolnir? Is giving a Heimdall monster an acceptable offering? Today's topic stands as ostensibly the most controversial. Not for the stupidity behind it or the wholly unshed Abrahamic baggage, but the simple fact that it affects so many pagans of so many stripes who make Loki a part of their lives. There's been a new argument to crop up that states that not only is Loki not a god, but folks who do worship Loki are mentally ill and are somehow less than because they make the choice to worship a deity who, on the surface, is one of the antagonist figures in our path. But when you dig a little further in the lore, in the multiple stories, you'll come to understand that Loki is so much more than the Disney themed god of mischief. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche said that one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star, which I always took being creative always meant overcoming the internal bullshit we all go through to better solve problems, opposed to tackling things and taking a cold, near Vulcan like approach to problem solving. To paraphrase in a set of terms everybody's heard, from chaos comes order. And every single time I think of Loki and I reread the lore, it's that line that is consistently in my head. We go through the lore and we understand that Loki has both been a massive help and a massive hindrance to the gods. When he shaved Sif's head, Loki's deceptive recompense got the gods their most powerful artifacts: Draupnir, Gungnir, Skidbladnir, and Mjolnir. When Asgard was under threat from the giants, the Builder came with his offer, and it was Loki's deception that got the Aesir their wall, kept Freya blissfully single, and got Odin his horse. Just don't ask Loki where they were for a few months, and I think everything's gonna be okay. When the Jotun Thrym stole Mjolnir, Loki accompanied Thor to reclaim the weapon in a very strange Little Red Riding Hood esque story. We even have a story presented to us where Loki found himself humbled in the face of their hubris when Utgarda Loki challenges Thor, Thjalfi, and Loki to a series of challenges, which they all lose. I think it's important to establish that due to scant information and the insistence of many people as to what Loki is or isn't, Loki's exact sphere of influence as a deity is muddied. Some say chaos, some say fire. I genuinely believe that it is that a very Nietzschean way of thinking needs to be taken when it comes to Loki. Loki is at very least a bona fide deity of order or balance, the commission of a negative act, an act of chaos, and in return, bringing about a positive outcome in the face of that chaos, keeping the universal scales consistently balanced. I would even go so far as to say that Loki's own behavior leading up to Ragnarok with the slaying of Balder, representing that behavior on a cosmic scale. Let's flash forward to 2025, shall we? As the end of this year is only but a few short weeks away, I think it's of immense importance to not only have this conversation, but to the folks who are always leaning in the middle of the road when it comes to their approach to our faith, to say it's okay to walk that middle road. It's perfectly okay to hear both sides of an argument in order to better frame how you believe in practice. And for us, the heathens who've been on this path for 5, 10, 20 plus years, misinformation and the masquerading of opinion as fact has been shoved down so many throats over the years. It's why I blatantly say that having a singular teacher in a spiritual path such as ours is fucking foolish, as you're limited to a single perspective, a single lens with which to peer through, and you don't do much growth in that regard. Which is why I say, let your brain do the walking and learn from every single source you can get your knowledge eager mitts on. A friend from Iceland said to me a few months back, live with your spirituality, not for it. And out of every single piece of advice I've ever received, this stuck with me the most. While the lesson hasn't found itself fully absorbed, it carries such a degree of weight with me, I genuinely wish more people would hear those words and consider the weight of them. It's my belief that Norse paganism, heathenry, Asatru, is modernity, is a mixture of history, culture, and spirituality, culminating into one big, beautiful place to walk and find truth in a world where truth is often shoved blindly down throats. I honestly believe that modernity politics has no place in a reconstructed religion that finds itself so heavily mired in the past. To frame how to practice and seeing people assign modern political titles to themselves and permitting it to intermingle with faith has always seemed really funny to me. I've met folks from both sides of the political spectrum who've had some wild hot takes and opinions on our path. And when you have people call themselves MAGA pagans or conservative or liberal pagans, I genuinely begin to think we're losing the plot. Let's make something perfectly clear here, shall we? You aren't a conservative pagan. Neither are you a liberal pagan. The elephant nor the donkey does not grace the presence of your spiritual spaces in any way, shape, or form. You are a pagan that happens to be conservative. You are a pagan that happens to be liberal. Politics is in and of itself a modern form of idolatry when it's allowed to fester in spiritual spaces. And the pagans that mire themselves in these titles are no better than the Christians who choose to say, Christian law needs to be the cornerstone in this country. It's not my place to say people should be condemned for believing how they believe, but rather I think it's important to shine a mirror on rhetoric I find absurd. If pagans wish to grant themselves these labels, that's perfectly fine. The Norse pantheon may, however, not be for you. As choosing to place politics on the same pedestal as your faith, you may as well start venerating politicians as Christians venerate saints. I read a fantastic article not too long ago in preparation for this episode about the modern evolution of the worship of Loki as a deity, and the author noted a very interesting point that Loki can be viewed as a deity of outcasts, a deity of fringe spaces or fringe elements in society, which brings me to my next point. Reconstruction can only get you so far. Because before one becomes a dusty graybeard pawning at tomes, faith needs to adapt in order to grow, and having individuals loud enough to decry the fact that Loki has become so widely accepted and venerated as the patron of the LGBTQIA plus community speaks volumes to the power of spiritual adaptation. If the asshats who want to keep the status quo are up in arms, frankly, if we're keeping score, Lokians 1, spiritual absolutists 0. Let's touch on the whole semblance of Loki isn't a god, which is frankly pretty fucking laughable. Especially the whole shouldn't be worshipped side to that rhetoric. Loki, no matter what anybody does, will be an eternally polarizing figure in the Norse pantheon. And to anybody in any esoteric path that engages in deity work, and in turn with Loki, again, there is a difference between trolling and being a dick, and malign your spiritual agency for doing so. Why is that person in your space? And to the people who are bashing Loki and maligning the beliefs of others who hold space with Lokians, are those people truly your friends? I feel as though there's a certain section of individuals in this argument who dislike the LGBTQIA plus community, who have every right in the world to practice Norse paganism, by the way. These same people also strike me as not having completely shed their spiritual baggage and are looking for an Abrahamic parallel to cling to. I know what you're about to hear will be the spiritual non sequitur of this still young century, but when I first encountered the Icelandic fart runes. I read the words inscribed 13. I didn't see the accent marks above the A, and at the time, linguistics wasn't my strong suit. And after having that word translated, pronounced as os, meaning God, and after hearing my mentor's thoughts on the meaning behind the word asatru, meaning faith in the gods as opposed to just faith in the Aesir, it made a lot of sense to me. As Aesir have become Vanir, Vanir have become Aesir, Jotun have become Aesir. I mean, Odin fucked a planet to make Thor. It's all just this grand allegory for the blending of cultures, the blending of humanity. So to say Loki is not a god and base the line Loki is counted among the gods as the whole heart of your argument is insane. Because based off that logic, not only do you deny the divinity of Loki, you turn around and deny the divinity of the bulk of the pantheon. Because by this logic, Odin isn't a god because of his mother. Thor isn't a god because of his grandmother. Tyr isn't a god by this logic because of Hroðr and Heimir. And this entire thing goes back to my other point that half Jotun speaks to cultural divides as well as blood. The Aesir were a tribe of deities, the Vanir were a tribe of deities, and the Jotnar were divine adjacent beings who intermingled with these tribes of divine beings. Before we open the live call in part of the show, I have to point out that our faith stands on the precipice of harm and has for quite some time, especially in America. Having debates and sharing knowledge is all well and good, but when debate becomes mudslinging and mudslinging involves enraged flailing at cameras for clapback clout, you dilute what it is you're trying to do. And if your initial intent was to enter the social media space to educate on faith, you've lost the plot. It's important to acknowledge that the concept of an American centric spiritual tradition bred within Norse paganism will likely never happen. What I can say in our culture of instant gratification and desire for rapid development, we get more examples of what not to be and how not to act because cults of personality rise, and these people who walk into these cults of personality inspire nigh on fanatical devotion. And 7 times out of 10, that devotion is abused. People are left hurt. People are left wondering why they left their old spiritual life if it becomes very much of the same when the 3 out of 10 fully understand that being a leader in spiritual spaces isn't a position of absolute authority with supplicants to serve your every whim. It's a calling. It's the desire to serve and be of service. To put this bluntly, as Tywin Lannister said in that phenomenal scene in Game of Thrones, any man who must say, "I am the king," is no true king. Welcome to what is going to be arguably my favorite part of today's episode, Open Lines, where we listen to the community who found themselves listening to me rant. And by the by, I thank you all so much for braving that storm. So, like I said at the top of this thing, we are now free to unmute and welcome in everybody. This is going to be an absolute de-evolution into chaos, and I think Loki would be so fucking proud. So, first and foremost, what did we think of my spiel? Because I think I tried to summarize it as best I could, and I hope it was effective.
You done well.
So, since we're gonna roundtable this thing, I would like everybody to mute up. So, Liam, you started talking. You were one of the first people to send in a request. So, Liam, you're up.
So, this one simple fact in history with Germanic to pre Viking Age to Viking Age to current, right, should be more than enough with the literature we have and the academics we have on the Germanic tribes and how they believed things, be more than enough to end the argument wholeheartedly without any other way to counter it. First, during the Late Bronze Age and Vindle Age, they had a word in Proto Germanic for the gods. And it was before, long before Snorri ever was a wink in the eye of his ancestors, right? And that word was Tersa. And the word Thursa, as Asa, also means gods. Thursa means gods. And it also translates loosely into Jotnar. It is a word that describes the people. Not only were the Asir, the Vanir, the Thursa, the Jotnar, the Dwarfner, the Elfner, and mankind all called Jotnar or Thursa at some point throughout history. And we have actual academic evidence of this from the Vindel Age. And the fact that Tyr was not an Asir god, he was a Thracian god, along with Surtur and many other Jotuns that are mentioned in the later translations and later tellings, such as Snorri's work. We know that evolution of ideas and evolution and adaptation of faith had progressed over time from one civilization to the next civilization. And if we are stuck so solely in the Viking Age, Snorri's work, we are doing ourselves a disservice with the progression of the faith. The faith is not dead, it is a living faith, meaning it has not stopped growing and changing. It is ever evolving as new gods take the place of old gods and new names come in for old gods to be renamed. So do the concepts and the ideas of what those gods' attributes, what those gods' stories and their lineages will be. And we have this historically backed by academics from the late Bronze Age to the Vindel Age to the Viking Age to modern times. That's it.
We're going to bring up someone brand new to this thing because she has never set foot into one of my open lines segments before. Let's play a game. You're up. What did you think? Because with all of the controversy surrounding this ridiculous issue, as far as everybody I know that I've seen, you have been doing the most headlong deep diving into the bulk of this. You're up.
Oh, I went full meerkat mode, digging as many tunnels as I can. And I found many different sources from scholars. Um, Going back to 1937 that talked about that were citing papers from the 1800s that people were making about Loki. One or two, I need to send those to you, Enter, so you can read them, and anybody else who would like them as well. About saying how now they were just talking about the stories and as they were reading them, and they were saying that Loki is needed. He is needed for the divine drama. He is needed to sorry, my mind blank. He is needed, especially in Lokasana, when he is let me find it. But he is talking about, or they're talking about when he is talking to the gods and saying, talking about how they didn't do what they were supposed to, and pretty much like you fucked up. Here you go. And then also I went because they were talking about historically, and I'm like, okay, let's go historic archaeology about what we found about Loki. There were I found 4 different pieces that were thought to be with Loki during the Viking Age. 3 during the Viking Age, and 1 was a little bit earlier. One is thought to be possibly Satan, even though it was dated to be the Viking Age, pre-Christian, and I kinda I had to stop because especially talking on TikTok, I had to because I'm like, "This is just getting ridiculous with how people are talking about it." Like you mentioned, Diana, about how you're just a lot of people are just being a dick about it and like, "Oh, you follow this? You think this way? You're not this." And it's like, "No, because 'cause I'm trying to give historical," but they're just like, "No." And with that, I got a very good question in my head of there's no archaeological evidence of Loki being honored or followed. What about Bragi or any other god or goddess that doesn't have anything besides Snorri? You know what I mean? That's a question that pops into my head with that.
So I would then have to kick it to you and ask you because, again, the mission of these talks on the gods is how does Loki resonate with you? Do you consider yourself a Lokian? Where does Loki fit in your practice?
I started following almost 5 years ago. And the first god I ever people don't think of him as a god, but that's okay. I had Fenrir on my altar. And about a year later, I started following Loki. And Loki has helped me enjoy the chaos of my life and take the fires that is my life and I'll run with it head on and do everything I can to keep coming back on top and saying fuck you to anybody else who is not who doesn't like what I'm doing or who I am. It's like, okay, fuck off. Have a good day. Not my problem. I'm doing what's best.
And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about our path is despite its really heavy decentralization, that semblance on working on the self opposed to working on the self for others is what's so important to so many people. And coming to the main stage, since he actually put up a video, haven't seen you around, bud. Ladies and gentlemen, the great and powerful reborn somebody's son.
So I obliged you to come and have one more conversation about this because it's been a long several weeks. And I think your introduction is a very, very excellent way to sum up just a lot of it. Um, I and a few friends of mine, some of them here tonight, have collectively come together to stand up for people who are being told what they can and cannot believe based on silly arguments that really have no standing point if you want to truly pick them apart during a conversation, right? So, with that being said, for someone like me, I have not always gotten along with Loki, but I have seen the value of his place in the story. And for me, in the lore, every character has a purpose and a place, right? I think of even modern day poetry that we call movies, right? You have 1 hour and 30 minutes to tell a story that takes place over 3 days. When you do that, nothing you use can be left out. Alright, or I mean, I'm sorry. Nothing that you can use should not have a point, right? So everything used in a story should have a point or a purpose or a lesson or whatever its purpose, it has a purpose, right? And so lately, a lot of this argument for me has been really irritating because it's blatantly the Loki not being a god argument for me has been very difficult because it's being used just as a weapon against people who feel differently, right? And a lot of it is targeted at trans people, like, oh, well, because of what he did with the horse. But I don't think that's the only thing that resonates with them. As I speak with so many of them, I see a lot of people who genuinely say no, he just felt like he's that character that feels like he's never accepted and like, yeah, he does dumb stuff and he makes mistakes and whatever else, but so do the other gods, right? And so that really made me think about the lore and all of these arguments about lore literalism and attacking on Lokians and Asatru, arguing with them and this and that. And the interesting part is that I realized, and I'm going to say his name because you referenced him earlier. I had a very in depth conversation with a mutual friend, Mr. Gums, who lives in Europe and is an Asatru. And his conversations about Asatru practice are very different from American Asatru. And you see predominantly American Asatru using this Loki's not a god, you're mentally ill if you worship Loki and this and that. Because as ironically as they use the lore literalism part, right? They don't really look at the lore literally. Because if you did, you would see that even if Snorri wrote his versions of the stories to keep the tradition alive, he was already Christian. And you can see the Christian lens. And so it's hard for us to really truly differentiate if he is using that Christian lens to make someone be a villain and someone be a hero, right? We see that a lot, especially with us pagans and our conversations with Christians and everything like that. It gets very, very in depth. And if you can have a conversation long enough to keep emotions under control, you can have some very good conversations. However, to have those good conversations, we really have to look at the bigger lens of Loki, right? Because Loki gets painted as the bad guy by a lot of people. But a lot of the gods did some fucked up shit, right? A lot of the gods did some fucked up shit. Loki, yeah, he fucked up. He had to fix it. He fucked up again. He had to fix it. That cycle continues until he does something that's unforgivable. But the people attacking him but defending Odin really make me question their thought process. Because when Loki fucks up and has to fix it, he genuinely is like, "Oh man, I just want to fit in. Like, I'm sorry, I fucked it up. Let me fix it." Do we ever really hear the All Father apologize when he fucks up? Not really. So he's the good guy? And then they'll go from there on the argument of the gods, right? Well, Loki's not a god. He's a Jotun. Well, if we wanted to have that more literal conversation, then so is Odin, because Odin came from Jotuns. And we could really break it down even further if we're willing to have these conversations about, well, technically, the Aesir and the term god are clan names or tribe names, right? For example, to compare it, just for context, to the Greek pantheon, right? Zeus is the son of what? Titans, but he becomes a god. He has to separate himself from his predecessor, right? And create a new name. This makes the concept of using the word gods as more of a clan name than a species.
I think at I think at that point we'd also have to put a clear definition on what is divinity at that point.
Exactly. But see, they're not willing to have these conversations because when you start going down there, when you break, they they, they act like they want to talk. But if you question their logic or you say something that makes them have to think, oh crap, I don't know how to respond to this, they go into defense mode and attack. And these people are the ones that are not helping the community because we're not having conversations, right? And I hate to say this, as much as I love being an American, we are some of the worst at it. We have this ego. We're Americans, we're the greatest. We know everything. But do we really, as the youngest country in the world, really? I mean, come on, think about it. Do we know as much as some of these other places?
See,
No.
I had this discussion with Liam and Reborn. I think this is going to resonate with you pretty heavy. I
Mhm.
said at one point that not only does modern politics not have a place in our path, given how deeply nuts deep in history we are,
Mhm.
American exceptionalism muddies the waters of faith in general. American exceptionalism and Christianity go together because Christianity, in and of itself, is an exceptionalist religion.
I agree.
Whereas us,
And I
it's
think that
very
that's
individual.
right. And I think that that's the big problem, right? Because like you and we've had conversations in the past. I was brought up Christian Catholic, and it's a motherfucker to deconstruct. I get it. And it's uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable because you feel like you have to change who you are, but it's not about changing who you are. It's about making your lens bigger, right? Because like there's some beauty in the Christian lens. There are some very valuable things. I can't put that down. But the world is such a bigger lens, right? And I think that that's where we really need to have these conversations because for me overall, and I'll end it on this because I know I'm long-winded, but trying to connect all those dots. For me, Loki is not just a villain in the story. He's another character that teaches us very valuable lessons. just like Othin taught us different lessons. Tyr taught us different lessons. Freya taught us different lessons. Njord and Skathi taught us lessons about relationships. Every character in the sagas and in the lore has a purpose or a lesson to teach. And if we start taking one out or invalidating the lessons of one, then how many more do we need to take out to fit your narrative? You can't pick and choose. It's all or nothing.
Beautifully fucking stated, and you just absolutely silenced the room despite everybody being muted. Well done, dude. So, we're gonna bring up Orphan next. Orphan, welcome to Open Lines, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me. Basically, I would definitely touch on some of the political aspects that you were discussing. I tend to make the statement that it is perfectly acceptable to bring your faith to your politics, but when you contaminate your faith with politics is where a majority of zealots go wrong, especially in this nation. But there is historical reference found in Germany as well for anyone who cares to open their eyes to it. Additionally, there is the concept of creation requiring destruction, and it's even cited in the lore. Ymir had to perish in order for Midgard to be born. Concepts like that are very integral to the entirety of the pantheon, and if you fail to acknowledge the entirety of the pantheon, you are quite literally a selective, mm, we'll call it practitioner, and you find that primarily in the Odinists, the lore literalists and the mythical literalists. Anyone who would actually say that the sky is Ymir's skull, you have to kind of bat an eye. You know, if you take a metaphor to the literal space, you're going to miss out on a majority of the abstract concepts found in the tarot. But I think that's really all I can.
So, then I'm gonna kick it to you. Where does Loki fit in your practice? How does Loki resonate with you? And do you consider yourself a Lokian in any way, shape, or form?
In a form, I am a polytheist because I don't really like the associations that come with certain titles, like calling yourself a Norse pagan. Political strife found on many of the apps have prevented me from labeling myself as such, but I do venerate the entirety of the pantheon because I truly do believe Loki himself represents not only chaos, but the uncomfortable nature of change that promotes growth.
All right. I'm with it. So, thank you for popping into Open Lines, my friend. Everybody, if you're in this live and you're watching, there's 28 of you here right now. Somebody go give Orphan a follow if you haven't done so already. Crimson Justice, welcome in. Dark Phoenix, you've been waiting so very patiently. Welcome to Open Lines. If you'd be so kind to unmute and say how you doing.
Hi.
So, your thoughts on tonight's proceedings?
I kind of came in during the middle of it, so it kind of flew over my head a little bit. But me personally, and I have seen so much hate between a lot of people. And I will tell you that I've known about the gods when I was 11, didn't completely become pagan until I was 18. And the first, and the, sorry about that. Bert. And the first god that I chose to resonate with it why can't I talk today? Was Loki because of so much trauma that I've had because I was abused in church by a few men.
Okay, I'm going to for the sake of you not going through some heavy thoughts, I'm gonna have to
Uh,
ask you to drop down. I appreciate you being here on Open Lines.
No problem.
Next up, Maddie, you know you've been waiting long, so what you got and welcome to Open Lines.
So you said don't focus on the Maddies. Um, but no, I think that when it comes to Loki specifically, I don't work with Norse entities the way that most people do. My practice is very different. I'm not Norse pagan. But Loki's interesting because I've always related to the story in a very human way. And I think that that's where things get crossed. I can relate to the story in a human way without associating human traits to a non human entity. And what's happening is people are associating human traits to an entity that is not human, be that gender assignment, be that trauma, be that understanding of the world, be that understanding of family, be that understanding of belonging. We're associating human understanding field. We're saying that he was of this tribe, so he was not this. But he very clearly claims to be a seer himself. And I think that that's a really interesting distinction that not a lot of people understand. But he was taken in by the seer. But does that not happen in the human realm as well? We have adoption, we have foster care, we have these things that are along the same line. Does that mean that he was not of if he claims to be of? That's my take on Loki.
Maddie, thank you for popping into Open Lines. Tinner, my dear auntie with the Baphomet sigil on her default right now, welcome to Open Lines. You're up.
Okay. So, with what Reborn was saying, I think that it's important that people understand that where divinity is concerned, morality is optional. What makes a god is not morality, it's cosmic obligation. So, a god isn't defined by goodness, worship, immorality. A god is defined by having an inescapable role in the machinery of the cosmos. So, if a being is bound by faith, recognized by gods, and written into the end of the world, it's a god, whether you fucking like it or not.
You could not have worded that any better.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you for coming up to Open Lines. Shadow Wolf, my friend, you are up. Welcome to Open Lines.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take a little bit of a step out of just the Norse pantheon to point out another aspect that a lot of people are overlooking. Anansi, Inari, Crow, Raven, Coyote, all tricksters. No matter what, the trickster has a important part of almost every pantheon, and whether people want to agree it or not, Lucifer or Satan is a trickster. There is a purpose in all of these. The fact of a wildfire is chaos, but after a wildfire burns out, life is renewed because there are things that needs that wildfire to start growth. And as I am so fond of reminding people because of someone who said this to me when I was starting my path as a young adult, how is a God born? One person has faith. How does a God die? They're forgotten. So the fact that we have faiths right now that started from a fictional universe, aka the Jedi Temple is a recognized faith now. It started as a script for a movie.
Pastafarianism.
Mhm. We cannot have a living faith without UPG. If all you're doing is worshiping the lore and history that was written by technically Christians writing about the lore and UPG of others, you're being a reenactor, not a spiritual person.
See, I like where you're going with the trickster angle itself. In this context, specifically with Loki, I always find a trickster spirit, trickster deity as divine entity that is consistently pushing, consistently trying to gain ground by fucking with someone. Given Loki has always had that dichotomy of I do something stupid, I do something good in return. Can Loki be quantified as a trickster entity? Because given that it's never inherently, I'm going to continue to push and push and push and push, there's always that semblance of I'm going to continually do good in the face of my own bullshit. Do you think that Loki could be quantified, well, rather, should be quantified as a trickster god?
Yes, because of the fact of he is a contrarian. He is like the Lakota would call one of the people who walk backwards.
I love that. Oh my. Can you expand on that for a second? I would love to I'd love to push this a little bit more.
Are you talking about
Um,
me saying about Odin?
Shadow Wolf, tell him about the reverse sacred hoop, the reverse color sacred hoop.
Yeah, Shadow,
we have
talk about Odin.
Task at hand here. The people who walk backwards.
Mhm,
That was what sparked my like,
mhm,
oh shit, that's really interesting.
right. The Lakota have a person they call a Heoka. There's the sacred clown. Literally, as I said, the people who walk backwards. This is someone who, if the situation is too serious, they interject comedy. If the situation is too uh lighthearted, they'll introduce a little bit of tragedy into it. It's balanced by being contrary to what the situation is.
Hmm.
And that's what Loki does. Loki is humility. Take a look in the factor of the death of Balder. Balder was at the absolute utmost hubris, could not be hurt, so therefore have multiple contests to show nothing can hurt me. And then Loki goes, yeah, but, and finds the one thing.
See, that's also interesting because one of the biggest things I think that we can see in the lore itself is the really heavy themes of how dangerous hubris can truly be.
Mhm.
The only reason
And
the only reason the mistletoe even took Balder out was because Freya believed it was too young to understand pacts with the divine. That in and
and
of
when you go
itself
to the fact,
hubristic as shit.
right, and when you go to the fact of even after that factor, the whole deal of I'll let him come back if everything and everyone cries for him. Well, at that point in time, Loki looks at it this way. It's like you just went to my daughter to ask for a favor, who you cast out to Helheim because she's my daughter. My son is bound. My other son cast to the ocean just for the simple fact that they're my children. And you expect a favor?
Yeah, exactly. So this brings a comedic thought in my head, and this is just how my brain works, knowing what I know now. Jormungandr, natural birth or C-section?
C-section.
The
Actually,
fact
snakes are born. Serpents are pretty tiny when they're born.
the fact that at least one person turned on this camera and gave me the what the fuck face. Thank you. It makes me so very happy.
Before I unmuted, my mouth moved before my brain, and I went, oh, fuck.
So, with that said, Shadow Wolf, thank you for coming into Open Lines. Pops,
Absolutely.
I saw you pop in, my friend. Welcome to Open Lines. I know you came in at the tail end of this thing, but what are your thoughts on Loki, the initial argument that has been out there saying that Lokians are somehow less than because they choose to place the broad focus of their worship on Loki? Welcome to Open Lines.
Me and Liam had a conversation a while ago. He called me on Messenger and we talked. And I have this theory that there is no such thing as God. That's a modern concept. The Norse called them Vaders. Us Celts called them she. The whole God label was something that was brought to us by the Romans. So this whole talk about using a Roman mentality argument that Loki wasn't a god, well, yeah, neither was Odin or Thor or any of the rest of them because there was no such thing as a god to us. They were just another divine tribe of beings, and no different than the Jotuns or the dwarves or the elves or or any of the others. So to me, it was just you know on the Celts we have the Fomorians, which is our version of the Jotuns, and the Tuatha De Danann, they married them on the Fomorian, just as the Yassir and the Vanir married them on the Jotun. How many of them had Jotun husbands or Jotun wives? So that tells us that they're all the same being, just different tribes. And I think the Yassir, the Vanir were just the ruling tribe, not really any greater or any lesser. So saying that Loki was not a god is kind of arrogant on modern day practitioners who are defining the god by something in our ancestors never saw them as. If that makes any sense. I know it's kind of late. I'm kind of loopy, tired, but
No, 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 no. I'm okay. I'm okay. If you're here, you want to be late, you want to be loopy, you're contributing to this conversation. And not for nothing, I do fully understand that while the concept of deity in this context does have a pretty heavy hit through the Religio Romana, but the fact of the matter is we are speaking more towards the modern sense opposed to the antiquitous sense because again, I'm very much of the belief that reconstruction can only get you so far. Reconstruction can only get you so far until you're that one asshole in every conversation that nobody likes because the first words out of a person's mouth like that are 9 times out of 10, "Well, actually." I don't want anybody to ever be the "well, actually" guy. Because the "well,
but
actually" guy, though well-informed and well-intentioned, is so fucking irritating and so fucking grating that nuance is completely lost on them.
like I said, at the same time, even reconstructing it, we're like you said, we're defining it by our modern mind, but our modern mind is not very. We're not doing a very good reconstructing if we're using modern Roman thinking in our reasoning. When our ancestors saw the world much different than we did. Hell, they weren't even considered gods at even that at one time. They were like just spirit, like, well, that's literally what Vader means. It means spirit, right? And and we were animists, and we gave we what do you call that? I can't pronounce the word right now because of my speech impediment, but we made these spirits, these entities into human form. We gave them human form, human
You
substance.
Euhemerism.
Yeah. We humanized them. And then we gave them names like Odin. Oh, the lightning and thunder, that's Thor, and and on and on and on and on. So, to me, the whole argument of a couple of lore purists decided that Snorri is the authority on it all, that Loki can't be a god. It's like, really? Like, Snorri was a Christian dude who wrote down some myth told to him by a couple of skulls. And my hunch is if you traveled all over Scandinavia, you probably would have gotten different stories of the same myth, because it was a living, evolving tradition. Even after he wrote it down, I'm sure there were still skulls out there telling the stories around fires, way different than what he wrote down.
Exactly.
So my issue is just with the lore period. Oh man, you're not real because you served Loki, and then nowhere in the lore does it say that. Why? Because Nori said it. They get it. Like we don't know that. Like,
Exactly.
there ain't when push comes to shove. At the end of the day, none of us know exactly how our ancestors practiced. None of us. You know. So all we can do is, like Shadow Wolf was saying earlier, and I've been saying it forever. Today's lore was some skull or some bar UPG from yesteryear. We're literally dismissing all our ancestors by making fun of people who follow the UPG. Like, really? Well, then you just dismiss all your ancestors. You know, you literally just like probably the highest offense among us to disrespect our ancestors.
Indeed.
And they started out as their UPG.
See,
Their UPG.
and that's the thing that also has to be said because these same people who denigrate Loki, be it on this platform or in other areas of spiritual spaces, UPG is valid. UPG is extremely healthy for faith to grow.
Because we're a living tradition. We're not a dead one. We're not a stagnant one.
I take exception to the fact when people turn around and make UPG harmful, which is why I turn around and say all forms of UPG are valid unless Odin commands you to rob a liquor store, then you're on your fucking own. But
Yeah.
that
I still feel that your UPG should be rooted in the lore.
exactly.
Unlike New Agers who will just pull shit out of their ass and say, "Hey, we're not New Agers. We do base it on reconstructing what we do know of the lore,
Exactly.
but we don't treat the lore like it's unbendable or unflexible because I'd rather drink water from a living wild raging river than from a stagnant pond." And that's what most lore purists do. They want to drink from a stagnant pond. Their pool hasn't changed in 1,000 years. It's like, really, dude? You're gonna
So
drink that water? I'm not.
so Heathen Nerd has been waiting patiently. Pops, thank you for coming to Open Lines. Heathen Nerd, my friend, you're up. Welcome to Open Lines.
Well, thank you. And I'm assuming this is for your podcast. Yeah,
Correctamundo.
fantastic. So I have one goal here, and that is to arm anyone who is listening, who may be listening, to be able to combat the people who say Loki is not a god, especially if they are a lore purist, because it is the lore that explicitly says Loki is a god. And when I say god, I'm using the loose translation of the term Aesir, because that is what our lore says. Our lore says explicitly Loki is an Aesir, and they will try to drag the conversation down into the guilt again, where it says, counted among the Aesir is one called Loki. But what they have done by jumping down to chapter 33 is they have neglected chapter 20, where they're talking about Odin. Because after Gilfie asks, what Aesir ought men to believe in, he starts talking about Odin. And the first thing he does is he tells a bit of a story about how Odin went after hearing a bit of prophecy and spoke with one of the Aesir named Loki. And you can look this up in every translation of the Prose Edda, right there in black and white, one of the Aesir called Loki, or one of the As named Luke. Asa Loki. You can even go to veluspa.org and look up that exact chapter, and you can find it written in Old Norse. We call ourselves Asa True. As means God. Asa True, true to the gods. Aesir, As. The ear makes it plural, more than one. You can see it right there on Old Norse. As Loki. If they are a lore purist and their position is that Loki is not one of the gods, then they have already self destructed their entire argument.
So, Heathen Nerd, I'm going to ask you because I've been asking a couple of people from this one. Where does Loki fit into your practice? How does Loki resonate with you? Does Do you consider yourself a Lokian in any way, shape, or form?
I don't consider myself a Lokian. I don't consider myself specifically devoted to any one god. The divine are not a cornerstone of my personal spiritual practice. I look at all the world around me and consider, metaphysically speaking, the nine realms. And there is, in my mind, a chain of command. I start with my ancestors. I go to the Vesphere after that, and I work my way up. I have never once found myself in a situation where the defecation has hit the ventilation to such a degree that I'm like, I need divine help.
Okay.
But I am open to the idea of working with any divine entity that would suit the situation. They all have different traits and characteristics for a reason. You have a certain job, you're going to get the right tool. Just make.
Now, in the grand scheme of things, what would you consider Loki to be a deity or spirit of?
Oh, I would actually agree with Orphan on that one. I always think he kind of gets the dirty end of the deal when people call him the god of chaos. Chaos is more of a side effect. I see him more as a god of change. He ushers in new tides. And change is disruptive. It disrupts the order, it disrupts the comfort, the schedule. Change is uncomfortable. But what does Loki do throughout the tales? Not only does he cause change, but he physically changes.
I like it. All right. With that said, stay tuned because we're going to wrap this fucker up. And thank you, everyone who has come through for this episode of I Am Heathen and our open line segment. That's all the time we have for today, folks. I want to thank everybody who came out for today's episode of Open Lines and everybody over TikTok who trusted me enough to share your insights and deliver them here today. It's been a long few weeks, but we are glad to be back. Tune in every Thursday at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for more deep dives and discussions. I am your host, Einar, and today we're going to be closing the show on something of a different tact. I've written a prayer to Loki, and we'll be closing the show with both. So if you're new here, get yourself something to drink, hold it up, and repeat after me. May Loki bring you the spark of inspiration. May that spark grow into a flame to provide light in darkness. May that flame grow ever stronger into an all-consuming blaze. As it is important for the fields to be scorched to allow new growth, may Loki be the first bud to rise in a newly tended field. Hail the gods, Loki included. Hail the folk, hail the spirits, hail the ancestors, and most importantly, hail your fucking selves. This has been a Blackthorn production.